Thank you for having me. I think this is, what, fifth visit to the Whidbey Island Fly Club. So I think I know just about everybody here, which is always nice. I'm Scott Willison. I own the Confluence Fly Shop up in Bellingham. Thank you all for your patronage over the years. I had a presentation that I was going to do that I'd done for some other clubs on kind of just a sampling of various fisheries around Whatcom County. A lot of them were kind of spring and summer focused, and as you can see from the clouds outside, most of that is behind us now. So I thought I would try to make it a little more relevant, and over the last couple of days I put together a new presentation that just kind of showcases some of the fisheries that I really enjoy in the fall. Some of them you guys may already be doing, others may be new to you. I know not a lot of people fish the Nooksack outside of Bellingham, so I'll have a little bit of information on that for you tonight too. But we'll start off with the familiar here. We're going to talk about saltwater coho, which is going on right now. Most years this fishery, if like Marine Area 9 for instance is open, will continue well into mid-October. This year it's going to close at the end of September, so get out there while you can. Anybody recognize where I am in this picture?
Yeah, is that Lagoon Point? Is that Lagoon Point down
That's actually Bush Point.
That's Bush Point. Oh, you're off the rock.
Yeah, I'm down by the notorious White Rock. So.
It's not white, by the way, but it's
Well, everyone calls it the white.
So where I like to do most of my saltwater coho fishing is right here along the west side of Whidbey Island. Most of my fishing is concentrated from, say, Eby's Landing down to Bush Point. Earlier in the summer, Possession was fishing really well, so I sort of bit the bullet and drove down there. But you got to understand, for us Bellingham people, that's like driving to North Seattle just about. Something I don't like to do, but Possession's a very cool beach.
Well, you take the ferry.
I could, but then I still have to drive to Mukilteo.
And catch the ferry.
Yeah.
But it's closer, isn't it?
It's a beautiful. Living in the North Sound, I have this cardinal rule that if I don't ever have to drive anywhere south of Arlington, I'm pretty okay with that.
Yeah.
Like if I go any direction, it's north or south, just a little ways. So if you're new to the saltwater fishing for coho, some of the stuff you're going to want to have, or the appropriate equipment, is a 6 to 8 weight rod. A 6 weight's fun for resident fish, and you know, an average Puget Sound coho, like a resident coho, is going to run 2 to 5 pounds. When we start getting some bigger migratory ocean fish coming into Puget Sound, 7 and 8 weight rods not only handle some of the bigger flies a little bit more adequately, but they definitely handle the fish. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll hook a 10, 11, 12 pound fish off the beach or from a boat. That's an entirely different beast. Only 2 lines that I use are floating and an intermediate line most of the time. Once in a while, if I'm out in a boat, I might put on a type 3 or type 6 full sinker if we feel like we see birds crashing bait, you know, 40, 50 feet of water. I might want to get my fly down a little bit, but it's a relatively shallow water game. If there's one thing to remember about all fish, not just coho, but they aren't really adept at looking down, so you always want to have your fly above them. They will move for it. There are times where we will even get them on the surface. There's a fly we like to fish called the Miyawaki beach popper that Leland Miyawaki designed years and years ago. And it's got a foam head, and we'll skitter it across the surface, and fish will come up and take it. It was 3 years ago now. I went out on my birthday of all days in early September with my buddy Colin down here, and I don't know how many fish we caught. We reached a point midway through the day where we had caught so many fishing subsurface on clousers and herring patterns and such we thought, how can we up the ante and make this a little harder? And we switched to topwater flies, little gurglers, and Milwaukee poppers. It got even better. Every single cast, we had a fish at least following the fly, sometimes exploding on it.
Was that that video when you guys?
That's
were
that
up?
video, yeah.
I saw
If
that.
anybody wants to see some of the highlights from that day on the Confluence YouTube channel, I've got that video posted of Colin and I fishing. My buddy Clint was filming. I don't know how he got this shot, but there's a slow motion shot on there of the fly kind of skipping across the surface, and then you see this big bow wave push behind it, and straight into the mouth of a coho as it engulfs the fly. And it's like, wow, that is the money shot right
I
there.
gotta tell you a quick story. The other night, I was fishing with Mark, and I lost it. Anyway, I'm bringing my line in, right? And we're BSing, and I'm stripping, and I thought, okay, ready to do another cast. I saw the bow wave. The bow wave was right next to me. Fly was in the water. The dang fish fell right up to my boots. I mean, and the reason I knew it, I just saw his black, little bit of his black back, but yeah, he came right in. Whew. And a geez, the waves.
That is quite common. I don't know how many times I'm fishing off the beach and I get kind of engrossed in the fishing, and then I look down and I'm like, oh, there's coho right in front of me.
Yeah.
And then I realize that he is locked into my fly, and I don't have any room to strip any more line in.
Right.
So you gotta sweep the rod to one side or the other, and that's the moment where they'll either commit or they won't.
Or they commit, they've had them commit, you know, when they come in, and then he goes swim right by your feet. You know, and you're
Doing the musky figure eight, huh?
Very, very much so. We do that at the boat a lot of times. In fact, sometimes you'll be reeled in, you're watching your buddy play a fish, and your fly's dangling off the edge of the boat, and then all of a sudden you'll see a fish dart out from beneath the boat and take it. You better have an eye on your rod and some quick reflexes, or it's going to be a rod overboard. Fly-wise, generally keep it pretty simple. Some variety of Clouser minnow. I like the craft fur ones. They move really well in the water. It's a softer material than bucktail. Colors, pink and white, chartreuse and white. Several years ago I thought, well, I never know, are they taking chartreuse or are they taking pink? If you watch the buzz bomb guys off the beach, there always seems to be a preference for one or the other. So I had the brilliant idea that, why don't I just tie one that's pink and green, or pink and chartreuse, and we'll see what it does. I think it was a pink year when I did that too, and the pinks liked it, because I think it had pink in it. But then we found the coho ate it all season long, so that was fun. And then this is a fishery you can enjoy either off the beach or the boat. There are oftentimes situations where we're out in a boat, we're literally casting a foot or two away from the beach and stripping it back. There's areas like a lagoon point, those fish will come incredibly close into the beach. So don't feel like it's one of those fisheries where you've got to be a couple hundred yards offshore and fishing deeper water. These fish can migrate very close to the beach. The one other thing I neglected to put on this list here, that is absolutely essential, and if you don't do much beach fishing, it's probably not a piece of equipment that you own, but a stripping basket. You can buy one, we sell them at the shop, or you can also make one out of a Rubbermaid basket and a bungee cord. Brandon, who works for me at the shop, prides himself on having made one. I think it cost him less than $5 for all the materials. He sat on it at one point and it got pulverized. I gave him one of the nice line curve ones for Christmas.
The other thing, telling this guy about stripping.
So I don't think it's possible to move a fly too quickly for coho.
That's what you see.
My common strategy, which I don't do for a lot of other fish, is I will cast out as far as I comfortably can. I'll then tuck the rod under my armpit, and I strip with both hands, pausing occasionally, but getting that thing moving. And a lot of times you'll pause for a second, and they'll hit that fly as it drops. A lot of these flies have a little bit of weight in the head, dumbbell eyes, or I'm tying some now with a tungsten bead kind of incorporated into the head. So when you pause the fly, it kind of drops and flutters a little bit and looks injured and vulnerable at that point. But yeah, it's a whole process. I enjoyed hearing about like the tarpon hook sets. I always thought, you know, if you want to practice setting the hook on tarpon, see how readily you can drive a hook into a 2x4, because it's about the same thing. And so coho, when you're stripping with both hands and then one of them takes it, you don't have either of your hands on the rod, and usually you just feel that resistance and you keep stripping. But the last good coho year we had off the beach, I remember really getting like the twist hook set down, so I'd strip and then I'd twist my whole torso and get that hook set, and my back kind of hurt at the end of a good day of fishing. So in terms of how to approach this fishery, Puget Sound, if you've never fished it before, is intimidating. It's a pretty good sized body of water. You feel like you're looking for a needle in a haystack, and in some respects you are. But a couple of kind of game plans to help you narrow down your fishing and find fish. I certainly like to focus around points of land. I mean, think of the Sound when there's a tide as more of a river. That water is moving, in some cases fast enough that if you stand waist deep in it, you're gonna get swept off your feet. What's nice about points of land is whether the tide is coming in or going out, you're going to have on the down tide side of the point an eddy forming or a seam or something that's going to collect food and bait fish and other organisms that are getting swept by the tide. And so those tend to be places you will readily find coho migrating very close to. If you think of all the good areas that we fish on the west side of Whidbey, you got Fort Casey at Admiralty Head, Lagoon Point, Bush Point, Possession Point. They're all points. I generally like to fish 2 hours before and after the high tide. That lets me cover a little bit of both. If I can fish all day and I've got decent water movement, I'll comfortably do that. The main thing is I want the water moving. At a slack tide or on a tide where you might have only a 2 to 3 foot difference between the high and the low, the water's pretty stagnant. Fish just kind of scatter and are difficult to find and catch in those situations. Like rocky beaches, although you'll get plenty of fish over the sandy spots at Bush Point too, but there are a lot of big rocks out there, so that structure often gets utilized by fish. If I've got a patch of beach that's studded with pretty good sized boulders, I love that water, because those fish will hang behind those boulders just like they would were they in a river, to kind of stay out of the current and ambush stuff. And then generally I'm looking to fish along a seam or a rip. Oftentimes, the relationship between Bush Point and Lagoon Point is a really good example. During the tide, you'll see a rip that pushes right in, literally almost touching the beach on Lagoon Point, and then it jets way out and it comes back into the Bush Point area. It transitions back in close to the beach, right around the big white rock that everybody's familiar with down there. And then from that point, it moves relatively close to the beach, all the way to the actual Bush Point before it kind of darts further out. So wherever I choose to fish, I want to be fishing around that line, because that is generally the route fish are going to take, is along one of those rips.
Do you notice that those fish come through that slot in Bush Point? Because I used to anchor off there, and I'd gauge with the buzz bomb guys how far they could throw it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I see it drop there, I'd anchor out just beyond it, because the fish just seem to come through one slot. And the reason I know that is because there'd be guys trolling for pinks behind me, catch a zip.
Mhm.
And yet, we're right in between me and the beach. You could just almost see them, they're just like a school would just keep coming by there, you know?
What I often notice is during the tides, you know, Puget Sound is always really interesting. You sort of intuitively figure the water's gonna be flowing one direction or another based on whether the tide's coming in or going out. And oftentimes it's going the opposite direction you would expect it to, or you've got water flowing one way close to the beach and then water flowing another direction
Yeah.
out further. What I notice at Bush, for instance, is there's often multiple seams or multiple places. Oftentimes it'll look like kind of a slick of water where the texture of the surface of the water is different. And there's one relatively close to the beach, there's one further out, and there's another one further out yet. If I'm in a boat, we'll often hit one. If we're not finding fish there, we'll move a little further out and concentrate on that other seam. Because for whatever reason, sometimes they take one path over another.
Okay.
But there are definitely areas there where if you look at a fish finder and kind of look at the bottom contour, you can tell it's kind of a trough or a funnel, and they seem to naturally want to migrate along that corridor. So the other thing I like to try to concentrate on, if I can, is hitting the beach at a low light period, early morning, later in the evening, or on a foggy day here. Particularly when you're off the beach, you know, your goal ideally is to have fish relatively close to you, and they seem to be much more comfortable to come in those low light periods. This is at Evie's Landing. You can kind of see the heads of bull kelp out there. This is midway through an outgoing tide. All of our fish that day were between the kelp and the beach. So you could get them with a roll cast. We would oftentimes try to cast a little farther, just so your fly spent more time in the water, because when you're bringing it back like this, you spend more time casting than you do bringing it back into you. So it'll wear you out. You'll have sore arms at the end of the day.
Have you ever used like a spay rod as an overhand cast? Make a long cast easier.
Yeah, I have used switch rods off the beach. I use them a lot if I come down and fish winter steelhead off the beach here. I often use that because it's just so much repetitive casting.
Yeah.
I don't want to wear myself out.
Right.
And I can spay cast very efficiently and conserve energy, and I'm just keeping my fly in the water as much as humanly possible. I don't use them a lot for coho, and my main reason for not wanting to use a spay rod or even a switch rod or something fairly long is that I've got to have this thing out in front of me stripping all day long. Holding a 12 or 13 foot rod out in this position and stripping a fly in, just the weight of holding that rod in that position will just really
Now I remember the other side of that.
Yeah, there is a downside to it. It does help you with the distance.
Yeah, you go home thinking you're a champ, and then,
Yeah.
then you can't get up the next day.
Exactly. I've always been a big fan of the notion. It's not how far or how you cast. It's what you do once it's out there, and that's the part I struggle with the spay rod out in the
Yeah,
salt.
you're right. You're not controlling it.
So there's one of the old version of one of my herring patterns in a coho. You can see the sea lice on its gill there. That was at Bush Point. Another shot at Evie. Anybody recognize this guy on the right here?
Oh, it looks like the football player
Nah.
of old
No,
days.
he's a Whidbey Island native. He lives down in Langley. He's spoken at the club here. It's Colin.
Oh, is that
That's Colin? No, I didn't recognize him.
Without a beard.
Yeah.
Yeah, he must have showered.
I just saw him at the beach here
Yeah.
a month ago.
Yeah, he cleans up well, so this is on one of his off days.
You only go out with him when he's cleaned up, though.
Yeah.
When he's not working.
No, he's a fantastic guy. If you're new to the beach fisheries and want to learn a thing or two, he's one of the few licensed, a few fly fishing guides in Puget Sound that's got a charter license, so he can actually take you out and legitimately fly fish for salmon. Another nice wild fish. That was down by the White Rock as well.
Is that the White Rock?
We're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about sea run cutthroat now, because this is another really great fishery. And of course, through much of the year in Puget Sound, we're targeting these things out in the salt. This time of year, particularly in the North Sound, a lot of these fish move upriver. Unlike the inland protected waters of Hood Canal and the Deep South Sound, where your sea run cutthroat are going to spend the vast majority of the year out in saltwater, our fish that are bound for the Skagit and Stilly and Nooksack tend to start moving upriver in the early fall. They'll continue to do so through November, and then they just kind of hang out and overwinter in the river. So you can catch sea run cutthroat in the Skagit, I mean, all the way up until it closes at the end of January. But prime time is right about now through early November. It can be really good, and these are a super fun fish on a lighter rod. Whereas you definitely want the 6 to 8 weight for fishing coho out in the Sound. Your standard trout tackle is more than adequate for these guys. You don't really need any special lines or specialized equipment, just a 4 to 6 weight rod. Floating line is mainly what I use. Floated line and either an unweighted or lightly weighted fly. Sometimes if I've got a little bit more current or the water I'm fishing is a little deeper, I might use a poly leader. It's a tapered leader that's got a coating on it that's designed to make it sink at a little bit faster rate. You basically can turn your standard floating line into a mini sink tip with one of those. Fly-wise, rolled muddlers, spiders, like the reverse hackle spider is a good pattern. The fly of the month I did this month on our website, the Peter Parker is a good cutthroat spider fly that you can tie. Beadhead woolly buggers, shore or boat, this is certainly a fishery where you can cover a lot more water, and in terms of a river like the size of the Skagit, you can be out in the main river casting in toward the woody debris on the shore. But if you start exploring and stopping at areas around like the South Skagit Highway or wading into the lower main stem of the Stillaguamish below Arlington, you'll find there's a lot of readily available foot access. And so a boat is by no means a requirement to do this. But in terms of the ideal water you're looking for, I love water that looks like this. It's fairly calm on the inside there, but you've got just endless root wads and log jams. Bring a lot of flies, unless you're a real precision caster, and even if you are, you will go through some flies in this fishery, because those fish will hang really tight to this type of structure, and sometimes even when you'll hook a fish and it'll go around a log, and there's not much you can do. Sometimes too, coho also really like this same kind of water in the river, so it's not uncommon that, you know, one minute you'll be catching 14-inch cutthroat, next minute you got an 8-pound coho on your 4-weight, and no idea what you're gonna do with it. Usually doesn't end very well. And then mainly I'm concentrating on the lower portions of rivers for the sea run cutthroat, like north and south forks of the Skagit are fantastic. The Stilly from Arlington all the way down to Marine View Drive can be good. I will say on the Stilly, if you get really low down there, be conscious of the tides and what time high tide is, because the river will back up, even down just a little ways below Norman Road there. I've had a couple days where I sort of miscalculated and ended up having to swim across the channel, take off my waders and use them as a dry bag for everything else. That's not fun in mid-October. But you can see all this inside woody debris here. This is right down below Highway 9 on Cedar Woolley.
Scott, are these dry or wet?
These are all wet flies. You will often get cutthroat to come up and eat dries too. A muddler, like standard muddler fished on top, or September, October, if I were gonna pick one dry fly to go with, I'd do like a size 8 or even a size 6 orange stimulator. Our rivers typically have pretty good populations of the large October caddis. So it's a big orange caddis. You'll see them fluttering around in the air. You can't miss them. They're like a giant moth. And that's one you'll get cutthroat to come up and eat. But as much as I love to fish dry flies, I also think that for every fish you'll potentially catch on a dry fly, you'll catch 10 more fishing subsurface. So. That's actually up on the Nooksack. The Nooksack
Do you
is
think
not.
do you
Yeah.
think that ratio holds for the saltwater as well?
I think so.
You do?
With the caveat that a lot of times, if you're fishing sea run cutthroat, if you're fishing a surface imitation like a gurgler or a Milwaukee popper, you will often see a lot of activity, like you'll see fish chasing your fly and jumping on it, doing everything but actually hooking themselves on it. Whereas when you're fishing subsurface, unless you get a good solid grab, you don't know if a fish is following your fly.
Oh, yeah.
You don't know until they take it, whereas tracking something on the surface, you're gonna see wakes. And so a lot of times in the saltwater especially, I will use a surface imitation as kind of a searching pattern to tell me if there's fish around. If I'm hooking them that way, awesome, I'm gonna stick with that. But if I'm getting a lot of fish to follow it and chase it and not commit, I'm gonna accept that, okay, I know I got fish in front of me, I'm gonna start playing around and switch to subsurface flies. This was on the Nooksack last year. This was early November. It was actually fishing for coho, but caught a bunch of cutthroat in this little slough down in the lower river. The Nooksack is certainly not known for a large population of cutthroat. In terms of numbers, the Skagit is by far the most populous cutthroat river. The Stillaguamish is pretty good too if you want a smaller river. But I do find a lot of the cutthroat I get in the Nooksack are pretty big, and I'll show you a picture of one here in a moment. This is classic cutthroat water on the main stem of the Stilly. It's always fun fishing when there's all these leaves around. You hook a lot of leaves doing it. But that real slow, froggy stuff, riprap banks, down logs in the river, they just absolutely love that kind of water. And then that is, that's a cut that I got on the Nooksack. Nooksack is notorious for small coho. There's a big run of coho that goes up the South Fork of the Nooksack, and there are always these fish that you land them and you're like, is this a jack or is this an adult? Like, it's just a couple of pounds. I thought this was a coho until I brought it in, and I thought, wow, that is a
Kind of rosy cheeks there.
pretty hefty cutthroat, but beautiful fish.
Is it clearly a cutthroat, actually?
You know, there's spots.
Well, that's a cutthroat, but
Yeah.
look how rosy the cheeks are in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was an interesting looking fish. Yeah, that's one of the beautiful things about fishing, is especially a fish like the cutthroat. There's so much variation. You know, if I go fish for these things in a river like the Hoko on the Olympic Peninsula, they're a completely different looking fish than what I catch in the rivers around here. The dark kind of tannic stained water, they tend to be really, really heavily spotted, almost black sometimes. But here, yeah, I mean, one minute you'll catch a bright one, then you'll get one that's got kind of a yellow hue, and then I looked at this one and I was like, that was a different looking cutthroat. But he was big, and I like that about it. So, I'm gonna switch gears and talk about another fishery that this may or may not be the year to go explore it. But Ross Lake is an awesome fishery in September and October with some of the biggest wild rainbows you will potentially catch around here.
Scott, where is Ross Lake?
Ross Lake is in North Cascades National Park. If you were to take Highway 20 over east of the mountains, just as you climb up the hill after driving across a portion of Diablo Lake, there's an overlook, and you can catch a glimpse of Ross Lake. Living up in Bellingham, we mostly access it via Canada.
Do
So
you
the
really?
only- The only road into Ross.
Do you motor all the way down then, or would you just fish up there?
We go, we drive up to Hope, BC, and then drive south down the Skagit, Silver Hope Road. It's about a 30-mile stretch of dirt road, and then that takes us to the north end of Ross Lake and Hosamine Campground. From there, we can launch a boat or canoe or kayak.
So how far south do you come?
I've gone as far south as like Big Beaver and Rolling Point.
Really?
So it's about a 40-minute run,
Oh,
with a
okay.
good outboard to get
Hey,
from
we're
up
used to
there.
going up to Diablo,
Um,
getting on a ferry boat, taking us across, getting on another boat, taking us up, it's like a Mersey dose to get up there. from
It
there.
takes the better part of a day.
Yeah, it
to-
does. It's a pain in the butt. You're transporting all your crap from one boat and then to the next boat.
Yeah. If you've got your own boat and want to launch your boat, it's really, really direct and pretty easy to just
Oh, okay.
launch up at the Hosamine Campground. The only caveat is this year, the road into Hosamine has been closed since August 9th. There's 5 separate fires burning in the National Park complex up there.
Is there no road that takes you up to that lodge at the?
The
I've taken a
the
canoe.
Ross Lake Resort?
Yeah,
Yeah, not really. You've got to take you could hike into Ross Lake Resort,
oh, but it's all by boat.
but you otherwise have to take a ferry from Diablo up to the base of Ross Dam.
Right.
And then from there, you either walk your stuff up the hill, or you get the resort to come down and pick you up and drive you up to the top of Ross Dam, and then the resort's on the other side of the lake. So they've got a water taxi that'll ferry you over to the resort. You could still fish out of the resort this year. There's no closures at that end.
Whatever it's worth, years ago, my wife and I took a canoe trip up there, and we caught the truck, so we loaded the truck and the camping gear, and they just drove us up that road, and we were able to get in that way. That was actually pretty simple.
It's not,
As long as you don't get caught by a windstorm, which we did.
yeah, that lake can be a little icy when
Yeah, it
the
was
wind
like
kicks
20,
up
30
on
miles
it.
an hour.
A lot of times, this time of year, you get a mix of weather. You'll see in some of the pictures, some days that are really, really quite nice and pleasant. And then like this was at the end of a big rainstorm. You could see my buddy Kobe from the Fly Fish Journal all bundled up in rain gear on the lake. Ross is another one where your standard trout tackle will work just fine. We mostly fish 5 and 6 weight rods up there. The line you're definitely going to want to have is a type 6 or even type 7 sinking line. Most of the fish in Ross we're finding in 20 to 30 feet of water. In the fall, you can actually, in some cases, do sight casting where you'll move along the edge of a shoal, or you can see a little step where the bank comes down. You'll often have fish cruising right along the shoreline, and if you watch closely, you can spot them cast ahead of them. It's pretty
Well, there was a
exciting
guy
fishing.
in here from, where was that guy from that was here last year? He was a biologist or something, was saying that there was a population that had,
Dave Flew,
was it?
Dave Flew.
Yeah, he said they had an explosion of shiners in the lake, and so he says, you probably know about that, right?
That
He
made
said they were
Ross-
right in next to shoreline. He said, and the guy that owns the Ross Lake Resort was a fly fisherman.
Mhm.
And if you were a fly fisherman, he'd give you all kinds of ways. You just go along the shore, cast into shore, because all these big trout were in there feeding on these shiners, so.
Yeah, Tom Barnett is the former owner of the
Oh, yeah?
lodge. He retired last year, but I don't know how retired he is. He's up there every
Hmm.
week helping out with the lodge. I just saw him yesterday, but he's a fun guy to fish with and knows that lake
Oh, really?
better than,
See, we used to fish it back, had to be back in the '70s, and it just tanked. You know, in the '60s, I guess it was good before my time. Then in the '70s, it tanked. You couldn't catch fish out of there for nothing. Now, then I guess it's rebounded since that time, but we used to go up there annually, just a bunch of guys, and it was just a struggle to catch fish.
Ross is pretty typical of kind of a high mountain impoundment. It's a flooded river valley. It's not a natural lake. It was created by Ross Dam. There aren't a lot of shoals in shallow areas.
Well, the other
You
part-
need shoals to grow plants and to attract insects and
Yeah.
something to feed on. When those shiners got put in a decade or so ago, one way or another, the trout, the bull trout that are in the lake, even the brook trout that they don't want in the lake but have gotten there via Hosamine Creek and a few other places, get huge eating these things. And that's predominantly what they eat are the red-side shiners.
Hmm.
You will go along portions of the lake and you'll look down and there's just a black line for a mile along the shore. And it's just shiners. I mean, they're everywhere.
Well, what happened back then, it was a big, they were supposed to be great eating, so everybody that fished it kept them. That was the big thing. It was such a struggle to get up to it. The people that fished for them and caught them wanted to keep them and eat them, so they caught them, filled their ice chests and came back. And that just kind of depleted the lake at that time.
I know that they changed the regs several years ago to, it's now one fish limit.
Oh, really? Okay.
Instead of multiple, and it's gotta be over 16 inches.
Okay.
So, you know, you assume the fish has had the opportunity to spawn at least once at that size. But I wouldn't keep fish up there. I think it's too valuable, catch and release fishery. Fly-wise, big streamer flies, the Twin Lake Special is kind of a multicolored woolly bugger type fly. It's got a band of black marabou in the tail. And one of the features of the shiners is they have this really dark, kind of brownish black lateral line. They kind of look like a little mini largemouth bass to me, and I think that's why that fly works. But Oliver white zonkers, I've got a little marabou clouser pattern that I tie kind of in a shiner color scheme. I call the Ross Lake Shiner. Big Dalai Lamas, that's this big olive cone head one there, works pretty well up there. The beadhead dude friendly, it's an olive and white kind of bunny streamer. What I found up there is more than having a fly that looks like a dead ringer for a shiner, you just want a pattern that really moves and breathes in the water. It can, to us, it can look very little like the bait fish you're trying to imitate, but if it's got movement and it looks alive in the water, it'll be pretty effective up there. Ross is so steep along the banks, there's really not any shore fishing opportunities up there, so a boat is necessary. If you don't have one, Ross Lake Resort does rent boats and canoes.
The sound of freedom.
How do you deal with this crap up here?
You don't have this down south?
No, down south, no. The palm trees remain still.
There we go. At least we know we're safe.
Yeah.
A depth finder is also really, really helpful to have for kind of figuring out that 20 to 30 foot zone. A lot of times with Ross Lake, because there are literally shiners everywhere, it's not a simple matter of you find the shiners and you'll find trout nearby. They really seem to concentrate on eating the shiners in key types of areas. So around points is a very effective area. What the trout seem to do is use the natural geography of the lake to corral shiners into areas where they're walled off on multiple sides, so they can basically back them into a corner, and then they have nowhere to go. It's pretty cool. You'll actually often see in the fall something that you'll see out here in the sound too with the coho, is you'll see bait fish frantically jumping out of the water, and then fish just crashing into them and crashing bait on the surface. And it's yeah, stop and fish those places, obviously, because there are fish around. So around points, steep rocky shoreline, you know, anything that's like a near vertical cliff, they'll push shiners right up against it. If you do have a depth finder and you're marking fish, you'll often mark the bait balls of shiners. It'll look like a big kind of round black mass suspended somewhere under the boat. If you ever see the ones that are this round shape and then it's got one end of it arcing upwards toward the surface, those are getting chased from below by something, and that's what's driving up to the surface. Almost every time we see that, we're like, it's about to be game on, and we almost always hook a fish going through that, whether we're casting and retrieving or trolling. But Ross is a huge lake. I would not say that it's super densely populated with trout for the size lake it is, but the trout you do catch are frequently very nice. Like a 16-inch rainbow is really nothing to get excited about. You'll get rainbows in the 22 to 24-inch range in that lake. So covering water and branching out and finding them is important. So that's a pretty typical Ross Lake rainbow, and that's one of the nicer fall days up there. These things fight like no trout I've ever seen around here. I mean, it's not uncommon. You'll hook them on these fast sinking lines, and you'll feel this up, and you feel the weight of the fish, and it's on, and then all of a sudden it feels like it goes slack. And you're like, I lost the fish. Then you'll see this fish jump like 5 feet out of the water, and be like, oh, I wonder if that was the fish I just took. And then you'll realize that you're still connected to that fish. They moved upwards toward the surface and rocketed out of the water so quickly that I lost tension on the fish and I couldn't keep up with it. But
Do you know what strain they put in there?
these are all, they've never planted Ross Lake. These are
Oh,
these
they're
are
all
wild.
native.
These are all
Yeah.
wild
Oh,
fish.
okay,
So
right.
these were fish. They're native Skagit River fish that just got stranded up there when the dam was built.
Yeah, like I say, we went up there during the 70s and part of the 80s, and it was the fish we got, you know, there'd be like 12 guys. We'd get like 8 fish or 10 fish. I mean, it was just awful, and the fish were all 12, 13, 14 inches because they just wiped them out, you know. So I'm glad it's rebounded.
Now that they've got a plentiful food source, I mean, that's a pretty typical fish up there.
Pretty fish.
It's a beautiful area too. You see a lot of wildlife. This is black bear we saw when we were up there last year in September. It's funny, there was a photographer taking pictures right around the corner on a point, shouting at him, hey, there's a bear coming your way. He got a little...
What's the mountain up? We climbed that mountain up there. What is that? Not Constitution.
There's
Where
Desolation.
the lookout is?
Yeah, Desolation Peak.
Yeah, we climbed that.
Yeah, where Jack Kerouac
I guess,
used to go
yeah.
up there.
There was a big article in the paper, so anyway, we pulled the boat over and hiked all the way to the top of that thing. And they had, I remember seeing that, is the lookout still up there? They had it all cabled down with cables and lightning arresters and everything. It was
Do
kinda
you
cool.
think there's holdovers steelhead in that lake as well?
Well,
Desolation.
they wouldn't, I think a lot of these fish would have originated as steelhead, but
They would have to.
it's been so long
Yeah.
since there's been access to the salt that
Oh,
they
yeah.
wouldn't technically be
Steelhead.
steelhead.
You don't remember.
I mean, you could call them landlocked steelhead in the sense that, you know, they call Great Lakes fish steelhead, but
Yeah.
those aren't really steelhead, they're just lake run rainbows. You gotta come out to the west coast if you want real steelhead. So, another typical fish, you can see that characteristic steep rocky shoreline. Along this particular stretch of shore, you've got a lot of little troughs that run along there, and those shiners just stack up in there.
You know, what's cool is the heads in proportion to the bodies. They're not like triploids, you know?
That's nice.
You know, I mean, they're just like a truck should look, you know?
Yeah, that's the,
You got a pretty big boat though, so it must be pretty easy access up there from Canada.
oh, it's very, very easy access.
The
Yeah, it's a
road
good-
is-
there's 2 launches up there. There's one at the international campground on the Canadian side, and then there's one at Hosamine campground on the US side. So when you drive into the north end of the lake there's actually a couple mile stretch of road that dips back into the US. You don't have to go back through customs or anything. You can literally walk back and forth across the border there. But that road dead ends in a few miles.
How is the road now? I used to go back in there like in, well, the 90s, you know, and it was not so hot.
It's closed now, so
Well, I
it's
mean-
probably in better condition than it would be otherwise. It goes through various cycles year after year. Last year it seemed particularly bad. I was in a rush to get in there before dark one night, blew a tire. My buddies on the same trip both lost their license plates. My friend Nathan lost both fenders on his boat trailer, one on the way in, one on the way out.
What you're
So,
saying is, slow down.
slow down. If you take it slow, it's not too bad. There's Kopi again with one of the smaller fish in the lake, but again, a nicely proportioned fish, and even a fish that size just fights incredibly well. So, we'll switch gears again and talk a little bit about river salmon and where you might want to come out and do that. River salmon, we're going to talk predominantly about coho and chum, which is what we'll have this fall. 8 to 9 weight rods. On coho, a 7 or 8 weight is sufficient. On a chum, an 8 or 9 weight is minimum. These are pretty burly fish. Mostly fish floating in intermediate lines. Once in a while I'll fish a sink tip, but for the most part, just a floater and an intermediate line. For the chum, flies like the starlight leech, Alaska booze are good. Those are good for coho too if you've got low visibility conditions, such as what you might find in November on the Skagit below the Sauk. Where the water is clear, California Neals, rolled muddlers, a lot of these very cutthroat looking flies I've got on the patch there are what we'll use in the sloughs off the Fraser or the South Fork of the Nooksack, because the water's pretty low and clear. And those big gaudy, flashy patterns that would be perfectly at home in Alaska are just simply too much for those fish. They spook fish. Again, we're concentrating on inside seams, slower froggy water, particularly for the coho, woody debris like you saw in the picture earlier. If I can find sloughs and back channels that have a reasonable amount of depth, 5-6 feet deep, and easy access connected to the main river, those are places where coho in particular will often swarm back into. And they take flies really well in that slow frog water. One of the great things about salmon, kind of like we talked about earlier, if they're there, you're gonna typically see them rolling or jumping or doing something. If I'm fishing on a piece of water for a couple hours and I don't see a fish roll, unless for some reason I'm hooking fish. I don't have a high degree of confidence that there are fish there. So, there's a great example of frog water. Coho all against the slot on that deep bank.
What river's that?
That is on the lower Vedder, so it's about 45 minutes across the border in BC.
Okay.
You'll find a lot of similar water on the South Fork of the Nooksack too. Just real slow water with lots of woody debris. It's prime coho water.
When you're fishing up, like in Canada on those rivers, if you have like just a freshwater license, you know, like an annual, can you fish in those waters then?
You
Or
can
do you have
fish
to have,
salmon.
like a special stamp or something?
If you've got the general non-tidal freshwater license for BC, you know, same license you would have to go up and fish interior lakes up there. You can fish salmon. You only need a salmon stamp if you want to harvest salmon up there. You can catch and release all you want without one, but if you want to harvest them, it's like $30 Canadian, so like $10 US or.
You're using a real basket up there?
Because I'm fishing the slow water, I often wear my stripping basket that I would use in the salt water. If I don't, I've got lines sinking at my feet. I'm often stepping in it. I love the story about the line tangled around your leg with the tarpon. It never fails. Like, I'll hook a nice fish and realize that I've stepped in 3 separate coils and, you know, trying to balance on one leg and fight a fish and unwrap yourself with fly lines.
Or the cast that comes up real short.
Yeah.
You look down, you go, oh God.
In that real slow, sluey type water, I love fishing a stripping basket. It is a lifesaver. Chum salmon, BC rivers, some of them get loaded with chum. Stave, which is about 25 minutes across the border from the Sumas crossing, is an absolute chum factory. The Harrison gets a big run. The North Fork of the Nooksack actually has a pretty decent chum run in the fall. So I know a lot of folks from the club, you know, historically went up to like Swift Creek area on the Skagit to pursue chum. I mean, it's a crying shame, but I remember when you used to be able to walk across the river and not get your feet wet 15, 20 years ago. There were so many chum in the Skagit, and they're just not there anymore. So
They got fished out?
No.
Caviar.
It's a combination of things. I think chum overall were very plentiful because compared to sockeye or chinook or other species of salmon, they're not, I don't think they're great table fare. So they never had much of a market for chum. Nobody pursued them commercially, and now there's a market for the chum roe or caviar. And that's coincided a little bit with the loss of many of our chum runs. I think too, on a lot of our rivers, chum kind of come in at that difficult moment too, where we're subject to a lot of big fall flood events, and so you've got reds getting scoured. I think it was a combination of a lot of things on the Skagit that impacted that run. But in any event, come check out the North Fork of the Nooksack in November, early December.
To get to the Nooksack
Yeah.
from you, because I know where your shop is, how long a drive is it from your place up to these spots on the Nooksack?
Oh, 20, 30 minutes. Yeah.
That's all?
Yeah.
Oh,
You
great.
just take the Sunset exit on I-5, Mount Baker Highway,
Okay.
and that'll get you access to parts of the upper main stem, and then Mount Baker Highway more or less parallels the North Fork of the Nooksack for quite some ways. Most of our chum fishing on the North Fork of the Nooksack is done from the Kendall Creek hatchery downstream all the way to the mouth of the North Fork. This is the North Fork in a pretty typical chum.
You know, Scott, just to mention, The intersection between the Skagit River and the other river that's up, that intersects and heads into
Sauk.
there. The Sauk, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
That was set aside because it was a collecting zone for chum salmon. And the bald eagles would eat so many of them that they couldn't fly.
mhm.
I mean, that's what we had at one time. And I've looked it up as research, you know, it's true.
I remember walking along the banks of the Skagit, you know, in December, out looking for winter steelhead, and, I mean, there were rotting chum carcasses everywhere, and
Yeah.
you saw them spawning in the shallows, and now, I mean, I'm lucky if I even see a carcass on the river.
And there used to be like 300 to 400 eagles there all the time. Yeah, you don't see those anymore either.
The Nooksack is definitely, there's a lot of eagles on the North Fork of the Nooksack. And for these chum, if you come up and fish them, one of the most effective ways to get chum, I think, chum have kind of a bad rap as being that fish that is often coming in backwards and hooked in the tail, and they're not, you don't want to foul hook a chum. They will destroy you. It's probably my least thrilling moment in life is when I realize I'm connected to the back end of a chum and it's swimming at Mach 10
Yeah, they're
downstream.
powerful fish.
I'm not gonna, I'm just
Trying
trying
the
to
dorsal fin.
cut my losses and just break it off. So I absolutely disdain foul hooking chum, and when they're thick in a run, if you're fishing a sink tip or a really heavy fly through them, sometimes it just happens. So a couple of years ago, we started fishing floating lines for chum, and then using a big indicator, like those new airlock strike indicators, and then dangling a weighted fly like a pink and purple starlight leech below the indicator, and we would figure what the depth of the chum was, and we'd set that fly 6 inches to a foot above the fish. So it completely eliminates foul hooking fish, and they love that dead drift. And especially if you give the rod tip an occasional twitch and get that fly popping up and down, it's just absolutely deadly on chum.
We were up at, I took Eric, wanted to go chum fishing up at that Rock Creek a couple of years ago. So it all started out fine in the morning. We were hooking them in the mouth.
Mhm.
Well, there must have been 200 of these things come up the stream at one thing. You couldn't even throw your line out, just let it sit there, you foul hooked them.
Yeah,
Then we just said, screw this, we just went home. And it's not fun.
no.
But I think a whole back, then one time, remember we were up there, we got into the bright ones?
Yeah.
We went up and ate lunch at the road,
Mhm.
and of course the river's going up and down all the time. I don't know if it was going up. We went back down after lunch. He and I got it. I mean, they were bright. And run came through. God, it was phenomenal. It lasted for about 30 minutes, but I mean, yeah, foul hooking, it gets old.
Oh.
You drag them suckers in.
It gets
God.
old after one.
Well, yeah, no kidding.
But try the indicator sometime.
Yeah.
It's,
Okay.
it's a great
Yeah,
way
that's a good idea.
to keep your fly
I
out of
thought
the
I'd
zone
never
where you're
resort
foul
to an
hooking
indicator,
fish.
but I'll do
And
it.
I think they like that presentation better than a swamp fly.
Mm-hmm.
It's really effective.
I noticed a lot of the drift fishermen are doing that too.
Mhm.
They got a big power there, you know.
That's honestly where I decided to give that a try.
Yeah.
I watched a couple of guys fishing a jig and a bobber upstream of me that were just putting on a clinic, and they were only fair hooking fish, and it was just one after the other. And I thought, well, I can do that. I don't know how pure it is in the sense of fly fishing, but you know, I would so much rather fish that
Better
setup
than
and not
snake,
snake fish than try to do it any other way. A couple of coho, hatchery coho from the South Fork and the Nooksack. That's a pretty typical fish for a more chum. This was a big guy from the stave a couple of years ago. Normally, a lot of the BC fish, 5 to 7 pounds is kind of tops. We had one year a few years ago where everything was big, and I had just gotten back from a trip to Alaska, and so like this is average there, and I get this thing, and I was like, whoa, this is a hatchery fish. I kept it, we weighed it at 12 pounds, 3 ounces. It's a really unusually big fish for up there.
That stripping basket you've got there, do those knobs actually keep the line from?
They do a pretty good job of keeping the line separated and keeping it from tangling. Those are made by a Danish company called Line Curve, and they came out several years ago. Best stripping basket that I've ever used. And then they've got a nice little, this is carved out on both sides of it, so you can actually lay your rod there, so you don't have to put it in the gravel or step on it or whatever when you're dealing with the fish.
Hey, we're gonna have to maybe think about this. I think you got about $2 into your outfit, and I got about $1.95 into mine.
I'm under $2.
I'm around,
Then I found the shot cord.
I got 2 bungee cords around me with it.
They're
My
a
bungee
really,
cord broke, so I might look at one.
they're a really tough polymer that I use and abuse mine. It gets thrown down on rocks on the beach. I've never seen one crack or have any problems.
I mean, that's a pretty big one there. Do you find it difficult not tripping over stuff when you're walking them?
I usually wear it off to the side, and if I'm gonna walk a lot, I'll take it off and just carry it by the strap.
So when you're stripping, are you whacking it?
Not so much.
You're up here doing it like this. I had a problem, I mean, it's, you know.
I'll adjust. If I'm whacking it with my hand, I'm gonna change something.
I just was asking, but. probably-
I'll move it around, but when I walk, I will often put it behind me. I don't want it right in front of me when I'm
Right.
walking. I have this thing
Yeah.
about
Tripping
really
over
liking to
large
see where my
rocks.
next step's gonna be, so I don't fall. And up in here, walking along all this grass, there's just these hidden mud holes. One minute you're shin deep, and then you're up to your thigh in mud, so I like to be able to walk carefully.
Are they doing touch and goes? Yeah, I think so. Sounds like it.
The last fishery I'm gonna talk about tonight is autumn bull trout. So bull trout are in most of our North Sound rivers. The Skagit and the Sauk and Cascade are 3 where you can legally target and fish for them. And I like to go up there this time of year.
I'm sorry, Scott, what were those rivers again?
Skagit, Sauk, and Cascade. There's sort of two fisheries going on, and it'll transition at some point, usually in mid-November. Right now, the fish you're finding are pre-spawn fish. So bull trout are a member of the char family. They spawn in the fall, and most of these things spawn way the heck out in the middle of nowhere, like places that you and I would not readily get to without climbing gear and an iron resolve. Right now, we're looking for them in like the upper Sauk and the Skagit up higher above the Sauk. They'll kind of collect in deeper areas and pools while they're waiting for a rainfall or a change in the water temperature, usually a drop to signal spawning, and then they'll go way up in these tiny little tributaries to spawn. So this time of year, when we're searching them out, we are using a variety of bigger flies, always big streamers. Rod-wise, your 6 to 8 weight is good. 6 weight is plenty to handle your average bull trout, unless, once in a while you'll hook a really big one, like in the 8+ pound range. Most of them, though, are going to be like 20 to 22 inches. And 8 weight sometimes is just nice for casting the bigger flies that we fish, because they're not a lot of fun to cast.
So how big are your fly?
Sometimes, 4 or 5 inches.
Right.
The bigger the better often. You use a floating or sink tip line, mostly sink tip lines. We talked earlier about those OPST commando heads. Mm-hmm. It's a short Skagit style spay line that works incredibly well on a single hand rod. And I've been using those more and more over the last few years.
So that OC line is designated as a spay cast line?
It's designed for spay casting.
Is that what it
It'll
is?
overhead cast as
So
well.
who makes it, real?
OPST, Olympic Peninsula Skagit Tactics.
Okay, so if you saw the box, it would say for spay, and then you just automatically know that you can buy that and use it?
Pretty much anything OPST makes is kind of designed with spay casting.
But
in
this is
mind.
basically for a single-handed rod though.
You can use it on a full-length spay rod or on a
No.
switch rod as well. I
mean,
like them best
Isn't
on.
it actually made though for like a single-handed rod for spay casting?
It is. That was kind of the main.
Why was
Element
it
of it.
designed or something?
Yeah, but it's a pretty versatile line. And Rio actually does manufacture the lines for them, but they do all their own designing and everything. So fly-wise, egg-sucking leeches, like the white one I got in this picture, this big Dalai Lamas, white zonkers, any largish white streamer is a very good bet this time of year. Later, as we get into November, December, and these fish have completed their spawning and they're working their way back downstream, it sort of coincides with the peak of fall salmon spawning activity. And so egg patterns, beads, those little plastic trout beads that look like salmon eggs can be really, really effective for the bull trout. So good bull trout water, inside seams, pools this time of year. Later in the year, areas where you've got either lots of salmon actively spawning or salmon carcasses up and down the river. Those are areas where you will tend to find bull trout because they'll feed on either the eggs or the decaying flesh. So flesh flies can be important in December as well. If you can't figure out where these areas are just by the smell, usually if you look up in the tree line, if you see a whole bunch of eagles, bald eagles congregated in an area, you're gonna
You're in bull trout
find this-
country.
Yeah, they show you where the fish are.
Do their numbers go up and down with the pink runs?
The numbers of eagles
No.
or the bull
Bull
trout.
trout.
I don't know.
I mean, because, you know, you get that flood every other odd year or whatever, you know.
I definitely notice in a pink year, you tend to have pretty girthy bull trout. Like November, December, when these fish are post-spawn, a lot of times they've lost a lot of their body mass and are kind of reconditioning. In a pink year, oftentimes those fish that get done spawning come right out and encounter, you know, a heavily used area of salmon spawning, and they fatten up pretty quickly. So they seem to be maybe better proportioned or better conditioned in a pink year, but I don't know that the numbers go up and down.
Right.
I mean, bull trout are threatened throughout much of their population. The Skagit Sauk Cascade system population seems to be relatively stable. And it's got the biggest bull trout population in the lower 48. In fact, it's one of the few places you can legally target and legally, you could legally harvest 2 bull trout over 20 inches.
Harvest them.
Yeah, I don't recommend it. I never keep one. I think years and years ago I ate one that was gill hooked and bleeding, and it was not one of the better fish I've had. It's kind of reminded me of if you ever imagine what a seagull would taste like versus a turkey on Thanksgiving. That was,
Well, like
Yeah.
chum.
Can you
Yeah.
say anything more descriptive?
Everybody goes, well,
I don't know. I sometimes think about what, seagulls are everywhere. What would
I
one
don't
taste
see them in
like?
stores. It used to be buy chum in the stores, but I don't
Yeah.
see them anymore. Remember years ago, they used to go buy chum.
No, because they changed the name. Now they market them as Kita or
Yeah.
Silverite.
Yeah, there you go.
At the very least, it sounds
Copper
more
red chum.
appetizing than chum. Yeah.
No, Kita is what they call
Um,
it.
Yeah.
It is.
This was a fish I caught last year in early October. This is probably the most colorful, well-marked bull trout.
Well, he's spawning.
I-
He's a spawner.
This was low down in the,
But look at his fins.
yeah, oh, he's got full spawning colors, but
Yeah, I know.
he hadn't spawned yet, and this is not, it's too low gradient. It's not an area where they would have spawned.
Oh, really?
But, no, these things will spawn, I don't think they even get the urge to go spawn until the water dips below 46 degrees.
Okay. Wow, that's big.
But I had not seen one that color before. Dalai Lama fish. There's the little trout bead. If you've ever fished for rainbows in Alaska, it's a popular technique up there, but you essentially use a toothpick or a little plastic piece, and you just peg this plastic bead about 2.5 inches above a hook.
So there's just a bare hook?
It's just a bare hook.
How big is the hook?
I use usually a size 4 short
Okay.
shanked hook.
So what does the trout think it's going after?
Oh, it's eating the egg. The problem with egg patterns, especially softer ones, is that fish tend to take them pretty deep. When they're in that mode of eating eggs, it's like, I'm just gonna swallow that. I know it's not gonna get away.
It must be tough to get the hook
So you
out.
get them hooked deeply or tongue hooked. With the bead, what typically happens is they get that bead in, they spit the bead out, the hook swings up and gets them usually right in the corner of the mouth or just on the outside of the jaw. So there've been numerous debates about how pure a means of fly fishing that is, and being a pretty
Well, you could tie a
passionate fly
feather on that
tyer.
bead.
So do you have a bobber on there?
I've got an indicator on there as well, yeah. So I've got the double whammy of non-purist.
So that's a sinking bead there, right?
No, you could put like a little split shot above it. It's basically a nymphing rig. Now I got the whole
You
trifecta.
got a 4-ounce sinker, crescent sinker on there.
Yeah.
Well, a 12-weight rod will throw that
Use a
out
pencil
there.
head.
Oh, yeah, the
What I
12-weight
what I
rod.
like about the bead fishing is that if you're gonna catch fish on egg patterns, it is not only effective, but it's better for the fish, because they don't ever take it deeply. So I've kind of justified it to myself by
You're more honorable man.
well, it's all about protecting the
It is a really
the
effective.
fish.
Have you tried
I was up,
Buzz bombs?
Yeah, on a
Maybe on a 10,
With a 12 weight.
15 foot, 10 weight. Yeah, I could.
you know
throw
what,
that
we
fish
used,
fly.
you used that
These smart ass
an egg
people.
with a trailing hook on char up in Alaska.
Yeah, it's a very
And
popular way to
you're
fish.
taking them one at a time. I mean,
Yeah.
one after another, it's just boom, boom. Once they take it, they're hooked. It's
Yeah.
not fooling around.
That seems like a good
and the
way
hook
to
comes
make
out.
it easier to fish,
What?
doing it that way
Oh,
instead of swallowing
definitely.
the egg.
Yeah, I don't want to hook them
Yeah.
deeply. I don't want to have to
Yeah,
reach in
it's
there
real
with
safe.
forceps.
Yeah.
I never thought of that, but that's really what
Yeah.
happened.
Even the standard soft glow bug, you'll get them like way back in the
Oh, I
throat,
agree.
almost in the gill rakers, because they just
Swallow
suck that
it.
down like it's just another egg.
Yeah.
And if it's soft, it's got a similar texture to the natural
Yeah, I thought it was
eggs.
so clever, the way I hooked them like that in the lip.
Yeah.
And I never thought of it until you just said it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that was the way it was set up.
Yeah. I must be a really skilled fisherman.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Over and over again.
I was more than glad to say it, too.
Yeah. There's Mr. Bald Eagle up in the tree, so I see more eagles on the Nooksack than I do on the Skagit anymore, probably because there's still some fish. And then another underwater shot of a bull. And that was it.
Thanks a lot.
Any questions?
If I drive up, my daughter goes to Western Washington.
Okay.
So when I drive up the 5,
Mhm.
where would I exit to get to the Nooksack? And where would be a good spot for me to test it out?
So, take the Sunset exit on I-5, and that runs you by Lowe's and Safeway, and Sunset Road essentially turns into the Mount Baker Highway, Highway 542. About 10 miles from town, you'll actually cross the main stem of the Nooksack at
So this is
Deming.
Baker Highway, Highway, what's the number?
542.
542, okay.
So you'll cross at Deming. That's a place called Nugent's Corner. You can certainly fish there. If you keep going up the Mount Baker Highway, right past where you have the junction of Highway 9 coming in, you'll start to run very close to the North Fork of the Nooksack. The area around where Mosquito Lake Road turns off of the North Fork, or turns off of the Mount Baker Highway, is a good spot. In October, if you head south on Highway 9, from that interchange there, the South Fork gets a big run of hatchery coho. And that's a really productive one to fish in October. That'll open on the 1st.
Is there a lot, do they get hammered? A lot of fishermen?
It can. You know, I found it, the South Fork's about 20 minutes from my house, and I found it to be like anywhere else. If you're willing to walk a little bit, you get away from people pretty quickly.
Okay.
Everybody will sort of clamor to fish the hole right below the hatchery. And then if you go anywhere beyond that, you won't have too tough a time.
So if you're fishing it midweek,
Midweek's always better than
Okay.
weekends.
I'm sorry, Bob.
Just about everywhere, if you ask me. Any other
Bob?
questions? All right.
You did a very good job.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.